If the Bible says that the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and the result was that there were giants on the earth in those days, then why does it not continue the story? Why does it stop right at the most shocking moment? Who were these half-divine, half-human beings? Where did they come from? What did they do to the world that only a few verses later, God would choose to wipe out all of humanity in a great flood? One question opens a chasm of mystery, and the strangest part of all is that it was left behind, overlooked, or intentionally silenced. No names, no specific actions, no clear judgment, just a faint shadow tucked between long chapters about patriarchs, genealogies, and promises, as if something dark had been pushed to the edge of the light because it was too disturbing, or because it revealed a truth not everyone was ready to hear. The Book of Genesis, the very first book of the Bible, is where we should find the answers. It begins with light, the Garden of Eden, the fall of Adam and Eve, and then Cain murdering Abel. After that comes the line of Seth, and suddenly the strange story of the sons of God. Immediately afterward, God decides to destroy humanity with a flood, as if that passage is hiding something, as if there's a veil over an ancient truth that God once allowed to be recorded, but mankind chose to conceal. And then you open another book, a forbidden text, not found in the Western Bible, yet preserved with care in the ancient Ethiopian tradition, and once regarded as divine revelation among the Qumran community. This book is called Jubilees, also known as Little Genesis. In it, the darkest patches of history are illuminated. The angels sent to guide mankind betrayed God. They took wives from among human women. They taught humanity not only writing, metalworking, and medicine, but also magic, sorcery, divination, and rituals to summon dark powers. And from these forbidden unions came the Nephilim, the bloodthirsty giants who ruled and ravaged the world. The Book of Jubilees not only provides names, it presents the entire origin, progression, and consequence of the event that Genesis wraps in a single verse. It explains why God had no choice but to cleanse the earth with the flood. It also reveals that a portion of the souls of these beings still linger hidden within the world of men. What you're about to hear is not just the missing part of a story. It is the sword that tears away the dust covering sacred history. And once you know it, you will never see the Bible the same way again. What would cause a book that recounts the entire history from Genesis to Moses to be completely removed from the Western Bible? What in its pages made the early Christian leaders hesitate, cut, and bury it? The answer doesn't lie in theological errors or historical mistakes. It lies in the content that the Book of Jubilees reveals revelations that not only record what happened, but warn of what is coming. The Book of Jubilees, called Little Genesis, was not written by mere human hands. According to ancient Jewish tradition, its contents were revealed to Moses not directly from God, but through an angel. The book opens with a strange scene on Mount Sinai. Moses does not only receive the 10 Commandments, he is also given a special angel who tells him the entire history of humanity. but from heaven's perspective, not the viewpoint of man, but of the angels who witnessed the fall, who warned of what was coming, and who wrote in the Book of the Ages everything mankind has ever done. In the Book of Jubilees, history is not just a series of events. It is a sacred chain linking covenants, angels, and human betrayal. Each era is divided into 49-year cycles called a Jubilee, and every cycle contains a pivotal event, an invasion from the spiritual realm into the human world. It is within these cycles that events like the fall of the angels, the rise of giants, and God's plan to redeem humanity are woven into a blazing, divine web filled with warning. And perhaps this is exactly why Jubilees was excluded, because it is not merely a history book, it is a reminder that what happened once can happen again, that divine beings once intervened on earth and may still be doing so, that the blood of the giants was never entirely wiped out, and that humanity, in its illusion of modern civilization, is once again stepping into a cursed land where light and darkness no longer have clear boundaries. The Book of Jubilees was never a story for the faint of heart. It is a war diary between God and the forces that once sought to destroy the order of creation. And if you listen closely, you'll realize the prophecies within it did not remain on Mount Sinai. They echo into our time. After Adam and Eve were expelled from the Garden of Eden, time began to pass in a way humans could comprehend day by day, year by year, generation by generation. Jubilees carefully records that Cain killed Abel in the 7th year of a Jubilee cycle and was then cursed, becoming a wanderer on the face of the earth. The lineage continued through Seth, Adam's appointed son, and mankind began to multiply on the earth, building cities, passing on crafts, and surviving in the wilderness. But according to Jubilees, even as humans lived on earth, another type of being, neither man nor fully angel, was slowly entering their world. That was when the angels, called Watchers, were sent by God to guide humanity. Each Watcher was tasked with observing and maintaining moral order, helping mankind learn how to farm, live, and worship. They did not come to rule, but to protect. But this is where a dark chapter begins to unfold. When the angels saw the daughters of men beautiful, tender, and vulnerable, their hearts began to waver. They no longer stood as guardians, but were drawn into the earthly realm. Some angels chose to remain faithful, but others betrayed their sacred mission. And that betrayal wasn't just a choice. It was the beginning of a cosmic collapse. They united with human women, producing hybrid offspring, neither fully human nor fully divine, called Nephilim. These first children were towering, powerful, intellectually brilliant, but their souls did not belong to the light. Jubilees makes it clear these angels sinned not only in the flesh, but by teaching humans forbidden knowledge, metal tools, weapons of war, and medicines used to manipulate life and death. A bloody exchange of knowledge began from the heights of heaven to the depths of earth, and instead of rising closer to God, humanity was dragged closer to the abyss. That is when the seeds of the Nephilim took root, and the earth was no longer a place for those made in God's image. but a stage for a hybrid race that shattered every boundary between heaven and earth, between holiness and blasphemy. In Genesis, everything moves so quickly that the reader barely has time to ask questions. But in Jubilees, the gaps are filled with terrifying detail not everyone is ready to face. The angels sent by God were not meant to dominate mankind, but to preserve and guide. They were moral watchmen, teaching how to live in harmony with nature, how to remain pure in a world full of temptation. Yet this mission was corrupted from within, not by men, but by angels themselves. They didn't just see the beauty of human women, they craved it. And from that craving, they crossed the line. They stepped out of their divine calling. They ceased to be God's messengers and became spreaders of forbidden knowledge, the kind Adam had only glimpsed a fragment of in the garden. The Watchers taught humans metallurgy, how to forge iron into weapons, how to craft armor for attack and defense. But that was just the beginning. According to Jubilees, and confirmed further in the Book of Enoch, the Watchers taught humans writing not to glorify God, but to record magical oaths, incantations, and rituals for summoning supernatural entities. They taught the mixing of poisons, how to induce illusions, how to control the will of others. They spread astronomical knowledge not to appreciate the heavens, but to predict omens and forge false prophecies. They didn't just bring knowledge, they brought a dark theology, where sacred symbols were twisted into tools of manipulation and control. Alongside this corrupted wisdom, the Nephilim, the children of angels and humans, became the rulers of the world. They were giants in stature, unmatched in strength, and cunning in mind. No one could control them, not even the angels who fathered them. They created their own kingdoms, declared themselves sons of heaven, enslaved humans, and shed blood wherever they went. What the Watchers had sown had become a divine storm beyond restraint. And from that moment, the line between divinity and evil, between angels and blasphemy, was torn apart. Earth was no longer simply the realm of men. It had become a battlefield between God and the beings who were once light, but chose darkness to rule mankind. When the Watchers broke divine boundaries and joined with human women, the result of their union was unlike any creature God had ever made. The children born were not human, nor fully divine. They were Nephilim, half God, half man beings, endowed with supernatural power, unmatched intellect, but no soul bent toward righteousness. They were nourished on power and blood, grew so fast they defied physical limits. Their hunger could not be satisfied, and neither could their thirst for dominion. The Book of Jubilees tells us that at first, the Nephilim were admired. They were seen as sons of the heavens, as heroes, city builders, and teachers of warfare. But admiration quickly turned into fear. They demanded tribute from the people, killed to maintain control, and captured women and children to satisfy their lust and fuel their blood rituals. They ate human flesh, and when there were no more people to devour, they began killing one another. The land was drained of its energy. Wild animals fled, and rivers ran red with the blood of the sacrificed. Every step the Nephilim took left a region uninhabitable. the brief detail in Genesis, when the sons of God went in to the daughters of men, and bore mighty men of old, men of renown, turns out to be a gateway into an abyss of horror. Behind that gentle phrasing was a time of chaos, where the world was ruled by supernatural violence, where humans were seen as livestock, and where God's law was trampled by beings who were once of the light, and when evil no longer came from rebellious men, but from the very offspring of angels, the earth could no longer heal itself. The Nephilim did not merely destroy mankind. They warped all creation, making the earth no longer a reflection of the Creator's glory, but a distorted mirror of rebellious entities. Their sins could not be erased through repentance, for they had no soul capable of remorse. And that is why God granted no more time to humanity. A judgment was prepared. A flood would come. But before the waters fell, a war in heaven had already begun, where faithful angels were sent to destroy those who were once their own brothers. If the Bible is the word of God, true, eternal, lacking nothing, then why are there chapters wrapped in silence? Why are beings that once shook the earth and ruled over all mankind mentioned in only a single line? Why have the Watchers, the fallen angels who broke the boundary between heaven and earth, vanished without a trace from the common scriptures? Was it because God did not want us to know, or did someone choose to remove those details to protect a safer version of history? That question is not just for scholars. It is for all of us, those living in a modern world, yet sensing something is repeating, because what happened in the age of the Nephilim is not just myth. It is the echo of a cycle where rebellion, mixture, and forgetfulness always lead to one unavoidable outcome: cleansing. But to understand why God had to destroy the entire earth with water, we must understand what really happened before. What you are about to hear is not legend. These are the words written in the Book of Jubilees, a book once viewed as revelation, once copied and read in ancient communities, but later removed from the canon of the Western Bible. Within its pages lies not only the origin of the Nephilim, but the full structure of their dominion, how they controlled humans, built systems of power, created their own religion, and turned the world into a factory of dark worship. You will be led into a time when angels were no longer companions of mankind, but became beings who demanded blood sacrifices. You will see how the Nephilim did not only kill with brute strength, but ruled through knowledge and fear. You will realize that God sending the flood was not merely punishment, it was salvation, not because mankind was evil, but because something had entered into the bloodline of humanity, making life no longer sacred. From this moment, we will step into the heart of the story where darkness reigned, where angels and monsters intertwined, and where the cleansing by water was born from a world that had gone beyond what even God could allow to continue. As the Nephilim grew, they were no longer strange, supernatural children. They became overlords. No nation, no tribe could stand against them, with their towering size and strength beyond human limits. The Nephilim did not persuade, they imposed. They did not ask for admiration, they forced humanity to kneel, and thus, one territory at a time, one tribe at a time, was swallowed into their kingdoms, the first kingdoms of humanity not founded by men, but raised by the bloodline of darkness. But they did not rule by muscle alone. According to the Book of Jubilees and the Book of Enoch, the Nephilim were trained by the Watchers to be warriors, sorcerers, and false gods. They used dark arts to spread fear, spells to manipulate hearts, rituals to create divine illusions. They ordered temples built not to worship God, but to offer blood and souls to themselves. They called themselves sons of heaven, bringers of justice, chosen kings, but all of it was a mask for blood-drenched domination. The first sin of their reign was cannibalism. It began as threats, then as sacrifices. Then came the worship rituals of raw flesh, and finally, an uncontrollable bloodlust. The Nephilim saw humans as livestock, as energy sources both physical and spiritual. They killed to eat, killed for pleasure, killed as an example. A crying child, torn from its mother, could become a feast at the temple gates. A father begging for his chosen child might be burned alive as an offering. And they did not stop with humans. They destroyed creation itself. Forests were burned to build towers. Rivers were diverted to feed rituals. Wild animals were hunted to extinction, not for food, but to be used in dark, magical experiments. And when nothing on earth could satisfy their madness, the Nephilim began to kill each other, bloody wars for power, where rivers turned to blood and the soil ran red with corpses. Their brutality grew so terrible that not a single angel in heaven dared remain silent. The Book of Enoch even says some Nephilim turned against the Watchers themselves, killing weaker angels, or twisting the holy name of God to summon entities darker than darkness. At this point, the earth was no longer the home of mankind. It had become an execution ground of evil spirits, a factory of sin, a place where light could no longer reach. What the Watchers never expected was that their own children would become a terror beyond imagining. The Nephilim were not only powerful, they multiplied at a terrifying pace. They grew fast, seized territory, ruled humanity, and began to rebel against everything, even their own fathers, the Watchers, who had once confidently abandoned heaven to dwell among humans, were now threatened by the very offspring they had created. Their prayers once begged for more power, but now became cries for help in the ruins they had unleashed. According to Enoch, in passages that match with Jubilees, the Watchers began to panic. They saw the earth drenched in blood, heard souls screaming from the ground, and watched as summoning rituals tore through the boundaries of the heavens. They pleaded with God, not as messengers, but as condemned ones with no way back. They begged for mercy, for return, for divine intervention before the children they birthed destroyed the entire earth. But mercy did not come, only judgment. God did not reply with words, but with orders. And those orders were given to 4 of heaven's mightiest angels, Michael, Raphael, Uriel, and Gabriel, the most powerful warriors in heaven, the merciless messengers, the ones who would execute the will of the Most High, like fire devouring a sinful field. Michael, the archangel of battle, was commanded to seize Semjaza, the leader of the Watchers, and the other fallen angels. He cast them into a black abyss where there is no light, no time, and no hope. Raphael, the angel of healing, but this time to cure by cleansing, was ordered to bind Azazel, one of those who taught mankind to create weapons and dark arts, and bury him beneath the desert, where fire and sand would torment him forever. Uriel, the angel of light, exposed the hiding places of the Nephilim, uncovering their sins for all to see. Gabriel, the messenger, became the executioner, sweeping away the monsters born of the hybrid bloodline. The punishment was relentless. No warnings, no chance for repentance, because what was happening was no longer a mistake. It was outright blasphemy. The earth had been pierced, morality shattered, and without God's intervention, the human race would not survive being devoured by beings that once bore the image of angels. When the cries from the earth reached the heavens, when the sins towered like mountains and life was strangled in blood and fear, God spoke one final word: forgiveness would cease. And so the angels were sent down, no longer bearing visions or teachings, but chains, flaming swords, and eternal sentences. The judgment began not with a flood, but with a divine hunt between heaven's forces and those who had betrayed the light. Semjaza, the leader of the Watchers, was the first to be seized by Michael. His pleas, his cries for mercy, could not shake the angel of justice. Semjaza and hundreds of other Watchers were bound with flaming chains and hurled into the abyss of darkness where no light can enter, where they would be imprisoned until the day of great judgment. That pit lies outside of time, outside of space, where sound is swallowed and memory locked away forever, not dead, but not living either. The harshest punishment for those who once bore the light but chose the darkness. But the sin of the Watchers did not end there. Their bloodline, left behind in their children, the Nephilim, had become a cancer, eating away at the very order of heaven and earth. And so, the war continued. No more prayers, no more teaching, only war between the faithful angels and the cursed race of giants. Battles that are not recorded in human history, but echo in the forbidden texts where Gabriel, Raphael, and the heavenly hosts unleashed divine wrath upon every mountain peak, every valley, every stronghold where the Nephilim hid. Destruction came like a storm. Those who once could not be defeated were crushed. The giant kingdoms collapsed in the night. The towers built for the worship of darkness were consumed by fire from heaven. The Nephilim did not die like men, but like shattered idols, so that no one would dare raise their heads to worship them again. But even though their bodies were destroyed, what happened next was even more terrifying. Their souls did not vanish. They could not ascend to heaven, for they were not divine. Nor could they descend to Sheol like the dead, for they were not human. Their souls wandered between realms, becoming unclean spirits, demons, and evil forces, still stirring chaos, still tempting, still searching for a way back into the world of man. And that is why God did not stop at punishment, because if the Nephilim were killed, but the earth not cleansed, then the roots of defilement would remain. A greater act was required, a flood from the heavens, a great deluge, not only to wash flesh, but to purify the air, the soil, and the very soul of the world. When the flesh of the Nephilim was destroyed, their blood spilled upon the earth, dissolved into dust, and their bodies rotted in the shadows. Many believed the nightmare was over, but according to the revelations in Jubilees and Enoch, the death of a Nephilim is unlike the death of mankind, because they are hybrids, half divine, half human. Their souls are not welcomed in any realm. Heaven rejects them, for they do not belong to the light. The underworld refuses them, for they are not descendants of Adam, and so their souls are trapped between the heavens and the earth, without place, without time, without form, but still with will. From that formless state, the souls of the Nephilim became a new kind of entity, evil spirits, wandering spirits. They no longer possessed physical strength, but carried the memory of a reign and an unending hatred. They hid in the wind, in darkness, in dreams and nightmares. They whispered into the ears of the weak-hearted, sowing doubt, lust, and bitterness. No longer did they kill with swords, but with ideas. No longer did they need flesh, but fed on fear. And so, though their bodies perished, the Nephilim lived on as formless malevolence. The Book of Enoch states clearly, "The spirits born of the bodies of the giants shall become evil spirits upon the earth. They are the spirits of the wicked, and they are the cause of all wrongdoing." These are not ghosts in the folkloric sense. They are the origin of every lie, every darkness that has spread across the ages. When someone is compelled to do evil without understanding why, it may be the whisper of a Nephilim spirit at the deepest level of their subconscious. From then on, in ancient civilizations from Egypt, Canaan, Mesopotamia to Greece, the images of gods of war, gods of destruction, gods of fire, and gods of seduction began to appear. They bore powerful appearances, but thirsted for blood. They wore beautiful faces, but hid madness. Many scholars believe that these ancient gods were nothing more than the evil spirits of the Nephilim souls seeking to revive their lost power, this time through worship. And so, the human world has never truly known peace since. These shadows, though nameless and bodiless, continue to live within systems of power, in false religion, in magic, and in corrupted philosophies. They whisper that you can become a god, that you don't need the Creator to attain strength, and they wait for a new body, a new generation to return after the Nephilim were destroyed. Their bodies turned to dust, but their souls did not disappear. They became not only wandering spirits, but built a new kind of dominion, not by muscle, but by worship. When mankind forgot the Creator, when future generations no longer remembered the true reason for the Great Flood, the spirits of the Nephilim began to rebuild their kingdoms not through physical empires, but through religion and mythology. In Egyptian civilization, we see gods with animal heads and human bodies, hybrid beings who ruled through ritual and metaphysical laws. The war god Seth, the death god Anubis, the sun god Ra, all were described as possessing powers beyond human limit, living among men but not of men. The striking similarity between these gods and the Nephilim described in Jubilees cannot be dismissed as coincidence. Many scholars argue that these were in fact the evil Nephilim spirits recast in the human imagination as gods worthy of temples and sacrifice. In Canaan, the land God later commanded Israel to destroy completely, there existed worship of Baal, Moloch, and Astarte. All required blood offerings. Moloch, most dreadful, demanded child sacrifice. These were not mere superstitions, but blood covenants with beings that once lived in the ancient world, Nephilim spirits exchanging life for power, crops, and victory in war. Fires were lit, drums were beaten, the cries of children were drowned out, and behind it all stood the shadow of an ancient spirit receiving the offering. Babylon, the proud and depraved empire, where the Tower of Babel sought to reach the heavens, was not exempt from this influence. There, gods like Ishtar, the goddess of sexuality and war, were worshipped with rituals steeped in lust and violence. Ishtar, or Inanna, was described as having flaming eyes, the power to control men and destroy them if she wished. This image may have originated from female Nephilim born of watchers and human women seductive in form, mighty in strength, but corrupt and cruel in soul, from east to west. Nearly all ancient civilizations share a common theme, the worship of hybrid gods, part man and part divine, with violent, lustful natures who demanded sacrifice. These gods were not simply products of imagination, but possibly faint memories of the Nephilim, preserved through oral tradition and turned into religion when humanity ceased worshipping the true God. They did not become atheists. They turned to the worship of dark spirits descended from the very beings who once brought ruin to the earth. Thus, the legacy of the Nephilim was not buried in the flood. It lived on in religion, mythology, philosophy, and even in today's systems of power. The death of their flesh could not destroy their souls, for they did not die like men, and what they sowed continues to be harvested in the modern world. Even though the ancient texts were removed, even though the stories of the Nephilim were dismissed as myth, the earth has not fully hidden their truth. All over the world, scattered in caves, ancient fields, or forgotten layers of soil, have been found clues that make official history uneasy. Giant skeletons, tools not made for ordinary men, and stone carvings of beings beyond the reach of any known civilization. In Anatolia, Turkey, ancient quarries have revealed footprints over 1/2 meter long, estimated to belong to creatures over 4 meters tall. In Egypt, near pyramids buried beneath sands of time, massive bronze tools, axes and maces weighing dozens of kilograms have been unearthed, far beyond the capacity of any farmer or soldier of the era to wield. These tools were not only large, but decorated with strange patterns, symbols not matching any known script. In North America, since the 19th century, archaeologists and farmers have repeatedly reported finding human skeletons of extraordinary size, between 2.5 to over 3 meters tall, buried in ancient Native American mounds. Some had double rows of teeth, abnormally thick skulls, and were buried with ornaments or weapons made of unknown materials. Many of these reports later disappeared, or were refused by museums on the grounds of being inconsistent with modern scientific standards. Stone carvings in Peru, Bolivia, and particularly the cave engravings of Sardinia, Italy, showed giant beings among humans crowned, holding scepters, with tiny people bowing before them. In Mesopotamia, Sumerian tablets speak of the Anunnaki beings who came from the heavens, taught mankind farming, law, and war described as tall, with eyes like fire, though modern scholars often interpret them symbolically. The resemblance to the Watchers and Nephilim is hard to ignore. The Book of Jubilees states plainly, the earth was filled with beings not created by God, and it seems that these physical traces, though buried or dismissed, remain silent witnesses to the truth untold in Genesis. Perhaps, before the great flood swept away all things, a parallel world once existed where the Nephilim ruled, left footprints in stone, swords beneath the soil, and memory in bones. We do not need conspiracy theories. We need only one honest question. If it was all just myth, then why does the earth still tell a different story? After all the crimes, the chaos, and the mixing of the sacred with the profane, Genesis records one final sentence like a judgment. For all flesh had corrupted its way upon the earth. That line becomes terrifying only when placed in the context of Jubilees and Enoch, because all flesh did not just mean humanity. It meant animals, plants, even the air. All had been tainted by the presence and influence of the Nephilim. According to Jubilees, corruption was no longer limited to thoughts or moral behavior. It had become a mixing, a disruption of the sacred structure that God had established from the beginning of creation. The Nephilim were not only born of sin, their very existence warped the order. When the Watchers taught magic, biomanipulation, and summoning rituals, mankind learned to experiment, to alter species, to combine animals, and to create nameless, purposeless, soulless beings. The world was no longer very good, as in the original creation it had become a distorted replica, confused, ruled by violence and invisible defilement. When God looked down, he did not merely see mankind sinning. He saw all life distorted. Nothing remained as it was originally made. Bloodlines were tainted by dark spirits. Rituals no longer ascended to heaven, but descended into the abyss. His divine presence could no longer dwell in a world that had betrayed the very structure he had created. And so, the decision was made not out of anger, but out of mercy. Not to punish, but to preserve the last remnant before all fell past the point of no return. Water, the first element God separated in the act of creation, now became the tool of recreation. The flood was not merely judgment, it was a reset, a global baptism, not for the soul, but for the earth itself. All corrupted flesh would be swept away. Only Noah, the most righteous man of his generation and his family, along with the untainted creatures, were preserved in an ark like seeds held in darkness before the dawn. Jubilees tells us that even the angels who carried out the flood wept, for they did not only witness death, they saw the end of an age. A world once made in light had ended in darkness, and only through water could God wash it clean and begin again with the fragile hope that mankind would remember and never repeat what had been done. In that chaos, when all flesh was defiled, when sin had seeped into the bloodstream, when darkness no longer lurked outside but had taken root inside, there remained one silent ray of light. His name was Noah. And the reason God chose him was not merely because he was righteous in his generation, as Genesis emphasizes, but for a deeper reason, revealed in the Book of Jubilees. Noah was the only one left with an uncorrupted bloodline, untouched by the fallen lineage of the Watchers. According to Jubilees, the blood of humanity was no longer pure. The unions between angels and women had not only birthed the Nephilim, but had infected human DNA with spiritual defilement. Over generations, this mixture spread not only through the giants, but into common people. Those who appeared innocent bore a hidden spiritual distortion, a contamination not visible to the eye. The fall was no longer just individual, it had become a hereditary plague. But Noah and his lineage were the exception, not only because he lived rightly in a corrupt age, but because he was the last man whose blood remained undefiled. From Adam to him, his ancestry had never mixed, never partaken in dark rituals, never interbred with the cursed lineage. Noah was chosen not only for his virtue, but because he carried a biological memory still pure, still bearing the image of God granted to original man, and that made him the remaining seed, not metaphorically, but literally. If his blood had been corrupted, there would be no reason to save humanity. The flood would have been the end, not a baptism. But because he preserved what had been lost to the rest of mankind, the ark was built, not merely to save flesh, but to preserve an order that had been defiled. Every tree, every animal, every species brought aboard symbolized God's desire to begin again, but only if there was a pure foundation on which to build. Jubilees also reveals that before the floodwaters came, faithful angels were sent to warn Noah, to teach him how to build the ark, and to help him discern which creatures were worthy to be preserved. Not all creatures were allowed aboard. Some had been altered. Infected by sorcery, they were left outside, to be swept away with sin and corruption. Noah, in his silence, was not a grand hero. He did not argue with God, nor preach in the streets. He simply listened and obeyed. And it was this obedience, along with untainted blood, that saved the world. In the traditional Bible, Noah appears alone, hearing God's voice, building quietly while the world mocked. But in Jubilees and Enoch, the picture is deeper and far more wondrous. Noah was not alone. He was accompanied by angels, guided, warned, and surrounded by a divine shield to carry out a task beyond human ability. From the moment God decided to destroy the world with water, he sent angels to meet Noah, not just to inform him, but to train him. These angels were not vague visions in a dream. They were visible messengers with form, speech, and purpose. They taught Noah how to construct the ark, its dimensions, materials, storage systems for food, water, and light knowledge impossible for someone in a primitive age without divine instruction. The Book of Enoch describes how the angels did more than speak, they acted. They helped distinguish clean animals from those that had been corrupted. Some creatures appeared like wild beasts, but carried cursed, hybrid blood, the result of ancient magical rituals. These were forbidden from boarding the ark. The angels were invisible gatekeepers, ensuring no defilement entered the new beginning. They also warned Noah of the timing. They showed him signs in the heavens, the cycles of seasons, how to count time according to the heavenly calendar untainted by Canaanite culture or the false gods of local tribes. It was because Noah understood this divine cycle that he knew the day the waters would come and was not caught off guard like the rest of the world. But perhaps the most sacred role of the angels, as emphasized in Jubilees, was this: they guarded his heart from fear. For in the decades it took to build the ark, Noah not only endured mockery, he witnessed the utter fall of mankind, heard the cries of tortured souls, felt the pressure of demonic forces closing in. No human could have endured this alone. Only by the covering of angels was his spirit preserved like a seed in the storm. Therefore, the ark was not just a physical vessel. It was the symbol of union between human obedience and heavenly protection. Every plank placed, every timber shaped, was the fruit of a silent covenant between earth and heaven. There, God was not only preparing for destruction, but sowing hope for restoration. And the angels, quietly, became the bridge between two cliffs, the shattered past and the fragile future. When the waters covered the earth, drowning mountains, fortresses, temples, and every creature that breathed, the era of the Nephilim ended. Those beings who had once stood as gods among men, who had made the earth tremble beneath their feet, were now swept away like dust. Their kingdoms vanished without a trace, their bodies dissolved into the mud, their names erased from official epics. It seemed the flood had done exactly what it was sent to do, wipe out the roots of defilement, but only on the surface. For Jubilees and Enoch emphasize, even though the bodies of the Nephilim were destroyed, their spirits, those unclean souls born of the mixture of angels and humans, continued to exist. They were not destroyed by water, for they no longer belonged to the material world. They lived on as exiled spirits, hidden in the shadows, clinging to human weakness, rekindling ambition, lust, and rebellion. After the flood, they no longer appeared openly, but disguised themselves in new forms: false gods, demons, ideologies, counterfeit religions, even systems of power that caused mankind to forget its sacred origin. Thus, while the era of the Nephilim may appear closed, the danger they brought still simmers within humanity. The Bible repeatedly notes that after the flood, giants still existed, descendants of Enoch. Goliath and the nations Israel was commanded to destroy were not targeted merely for moral corruption, but because they bore traces of the ancient mixture remnants of the defiled bloodline. Perhaps some portion of the Nephilim was preserved, hidden among peoples, in cultural legacies, in bloodlines whose origins remain unclear. The question is not about the past, but about the present. If those evil spirits still exist, if they still seek return through worship, through misguided philosophies, through modern technologies and bioengineering, then what edge of the abyss are we standing on? This modern world with its frantic science, its dream of upgrading humanity, its ambition to override biological limits, how different is it from the age before the flood? Perhaps it is with this foresight that God preserved the Book of Jubilees as a warning for future generations. Not everything buried is dead. Some things are only waiting for the chance to return. The Great Flood was an ending, but also a warning. If the spirit of the Nephilim still lives, then the war has never truly ended. When we place the Book of Jubilees alongside other forbidden texts like Enoch, Baruch, or Jasher, a strange truth begins to emerge. They all speak of the Nephilim not as mythical legends, but as real entities, forces that once existed and left a lasting impact. Each text is a fragment of the same mirror, reflecting a truth omitted from the mainstream Bible, that the world before the flood was not just sinful, it had been invaded. The Book of Enoch offers the most detailed account of the Watcher's fall, how they created the Nephilim, and the unimaginable consequences that followed. It names each rebellious angel, every forbidden craft taught to mankind, from magic, incantations, poisons, to the twisting of gender and the distortion of the soul's very nature. It reveals not just a fall, but a system, a strategy, a silent coup against God waged from within humanity. The Book of Baruch, though prophetic and apocalyptic in tone, reveals that the consequences of the Nephilim did not end with the pre-flood era. It describes the ages that followed the destruction of Jerusalem, in which the shadows of false gods and those who came from the heavens continued to guide proud empires like Babylon, Greece, and Rome. Perhaps the Nephilim no longer manifested as towering giants, but through ideological control and dominion over power. And the Book of Jasher, though removed from the canon, offers startling details about giants who still lived after the flood. Descendants of Anak, the Rephaim, or the warriors of Canaan. These were the people who once terrified Israel, who forced Moses to plead for God's direction on how to defeat them. They were not merely strong men, but a strange lineage, possibly survivors of the flood, or the result of a renewed rebellion. All of this brings us to a haunting question. If three different texts, from three different eras, in three different literary styles, all confirm the continued presence and influence of the Nephilim, then are we witnessing the return of an ancient cycle? Could it be that Nephilim are not just history, but a pattern where rebellious spirits always seek to return? Through new forms, new vessels, new languages. Today, as humanity begins to manipulate genes, engineer enhanced humans, and declare mastery over the power of creation, are we standing at the edge of another flood? Perhaps this time, not of water, but of inner collapse, spiritual erosion, and a generation adrift in what appears to be a civilized world. The banned texts were never just ancient history. They are warning bells for those still willing to listen. In this age where mankind believes it has stepped out from the shadows of superstition and myth, a growing number of scholars and researchers are looking back, re-examining forgotten texts to better understand modern phenomena. They no longer read Jubilees, Enoch, or Jasher as mere ancient lore. They view them as ancient records, accounts of a time when humanity interacted with non-human entities, and the deep consequences of genetic tampering, spiritual corruption, and abuse of power. And what's most chilling, they believe what once happened may be happening again in another form. Modern genetic technologies, from CRISPR to interspecies gene splicing, are creating a world in which mankind can design future generations. The question is no longer, should we do this, but how far will we go? Selective bloodlines, altered traits, hybrid creatures born in labs. These may sound scientific, but they eerily echo how the Watchers once manipulated creation, as described in the ancient texts. When we begin to improve what God has made, are we walking the same ancient path the Nephilim once carved? Simultaneously, a new form of life is emerging: artificial intelligence. Tech developers call it a tool, a servant, a convenience. But just as the Watchers once taught humanity writing, metallurgy, and sorcery, AI now teaches mankind how to bypass morality, manipulate behavior, and even redefine consciousness. Some theologians now ask if the spirits of the Nephilim still wander. Could they inhabit this new form, not needing flesh, only a system complex enough to host rebellious will and dark awareness? Another theory, suggested by many scholars, is the intervention of non-human entities under names like aliens, interdimensional beings, or higher intelligences who once guided ancient humanity. These images appear in myths across cultures. Some believe they are modern disguises of the old Watchers, beings exiled from heaven who never gave up their ambition to rule the earth again. From that perspective, the Bible and banned books are not just history, they are maps of warning. What happened before has not died, it has only changed its name. The Nephilim may no longer carry swords or wear giant flesh, but if they can return through genes, through machines, through ideologies that erase divine identity, then perhaps the ancient war is quietly returning. And the question is no longer, is it real? But are we awake enough to recognize it when it returns, informs the world celebrates as progress? The story you've just heard may have taken place thousands of years ago, in a world that seems distant, where fallen angels walked among men, where giants trod the earth, where life was mixed until it lost its sacred form. But what lies beneath that story? Rebellion, mixture, domination by darkness is repeating in our own time, not with swords or stone towers, but with invisible algorithms, humanitarian facades, and the seductive whisper that mankind can become God. Is it possible that you, too, are living in a world that is slowly erasing the boundary between human and what is no longer human today? People no longer build towers to reach heaven, they build networks to override the will. They no longer invoke gods by name, but repeat the old rites in labs, on political stages, in virtual worlds where identity can be reshaped endlessly. In the midst of all this upheaval, perhaps the most important question is not, is it true? But where am I in this stream of history? Perhaps you are a modern-day Noah, one who still holds a whole soul amidst the storm of information. In a world where truth is forgotten and light is distorted, perhaps you are being called to build an ark, not of wood, but of faith, awareness, and courage. An invisible ark, yet strong enough to preserve identity, purity, and the thread that ties you to God before the waters rise again. And if so, then this story is not just history, it is a calling. Take a few minutes after this video to sit quietly with yourself. Write down one thing you will change or one thing you will guard, so the story is not just heard, but lived. If you are one of the few who still remember these truths, perhaps you are not just a listener. Perhaps you were chosen to pass it on, to protect the sacred that many generations have lost. Don't keep it to yourself. Share in the comments what moved you most, what line awakened you, or simply leave a prayer for yourself and for this world. Together, we will reopen doors that were long locked. Some stories never end. They live quietly in the way we choose to live each day. Where will today's story continue, if not in your heart? If you are one of the few who still remember these truths, perhaps you are not just a listener. Perhaps you are the one chosen to guard them, to warn, to tell again, not because you know more, but because you feel deeper, because something in you stirred when you heard of the angel's fall, the mingling of bloodlines, and the ancient spirits that quietly return. That is not fear, that is recognition. A sacred memory beyond books and language, as if your soul had always known this, long ago. So don't keep it to yourself. Share in the comments. What struck you most? What line made you pause and fall silent? What image felt like looking into a forgotten memory? That may be how the story continues, not with evidence or argument, but through a community of hearts that still tremble before the sacred. Some stories never close. They do not need an ending, because they are not held in books. They live in the way we choose to live, in the way you look at the world, in how you tell what is real from what is false, in the decision to guard your soul from the mixture creeping in from every side. And if you're asking yourself, what can I do in the face of such a vast truth? Begin with something small, a prayer, a faithful action, a refusal of that which no longer bears the image of man, but enters our world disguised. You are not alone. Those who listen, though few, are always present in every generation. And they, not the powerful, are the ones who preserve the light when it seems the darkness has swallowed all. Where will today's story continue, if not in your heart? Amen.